Why do these people want to censor us? What is wrong with free speech? What's wrong with freedom of the press? Why are they doing this?
Down deep, I always consider it a recognition and acknowledgement that they're wrong either on a moral position, a factual position, or something else. Because you're right, there's no reason to fear free speech, free thought, free debate, free dialogue if you're in the right. That was our founders' argument, that it's only if you think down deep, you know what, my position isn't popular, my position isn't correct, my position isn't morally or politically or factually correct, that I have to suppress and censor speech. I mean, when the President Trump asked me to get involved on behalf of the election cases right after the election, that was my argument to the officials in Georgia. It's like you can gain everybody's confidence, including the president's, in the accuracy of the election and the integrity of its procedures by being as transparent as possible, by doing basic audit procedures and protocols. And it can't be what I call a Madoff audit. It can't be ask Madoff to double check his books and come back and tell you, don't worry, everything's fine. And yet that's precisely what they did. They had the state come back and say, don't worry, everything's fine. And now, of course, what we're finding in Georgia, we're finding in Arizona, we're finding in Wisconsin, what we're finding in Pennsylvania is there are a lot of anomalies that were not properly discovered and discussed and disclosed. And that's only going to undermine confidence in elections over the long term. But they cared more about the outcome of the election than the public confidence in the integrity of the outcome.
So let me go back again to macro, because that's where George Gammon and I hang out. Why? What are they covering up? What are they afraid? Do they know that they're screwed up, or are they just covering up to cover it up? I mean, what in the world's wrong with these people?
I think it's a bifurcated phenomenon. One is they know their positions are unpopular. So down deep, they know that it's not so much that they always think they're wrong factually or morally. It's that they know the world wouldn't accept their positions if they were open and transparent about them. So like if you went out to the world and said, you know, we really want to be able to chip you. And in that chip, we want to be able to have, that's going to be where your currency is. That's going to be where your health records are. Maybe we can even have remote access to release vaccines through that, or some sort of drug into your body with quantum tattoos. They knew that, you know, most Americans, most people around the world would be like, no, thank you. So instead, they have to sell it a different way. You know, that, hey, there's a scary pandemic out there. This is really dangerous for the sake of your safety, for the sake of the economy, in order to be able to communicate, to be out in the world. You need to have this little digital certificate, say, or you need to have this vaccine. And it's one step, a little further gradual, a little further gradual. It's like what they're doing with the global tax proposal. The only way to enforce that global tax proposal is to create a global currency. And the only real way to create an effective global currency in the modern age is for that to be a digital currency. And if people think about it, imagine if there was a chip, you know, if you could physically control your body. Look at what they're doing on biometrics in India, for example. They can identify everyone. They can track everyone. They can control everyone. And it's people who down deep think you're better off if we control you. Even if you don't recognize that benefit, you don't understand. We're the elite. We're the people that know better than you do.
So do you know, during World War II, when I studied Hitler, the way he got his plans across was a thing called a little atrocity. You know, little atrocities that got the Jews to wear a yellow star. And then it just got worse and worse and worse. So when I saw this vaccine come on the scene, to me, that was like the yellow star. Do you sense a correlation with that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it was to make life so miserable by using public health interventions that we have never used in the history of the world. We've never employed the lockdowns as a method of dealing with an airborne virus. We've never told people to stay indoors as a response to an airborne virus that mostly dies in the sunshine and outdoors. There's a bunch of things we've never done before. And the goal wasn't to stop the virus. The goal was to condition people to be ready to say, please, please, government, give me a vaccine. Give me some experimental drug that hasn't even met regular FDA vaccine testing, which usually takes several years, even for a virus, a coronavirus that's never had a successful vaccine over time in its history, for a virus that's not even that lethal to most populations. So that where the unknown risk of the vaccine, the long tail risk, you could say, are going to be are the ones that are really dangerous compared to the short term risk of COVID. So it was no question this was the protocol, the procedure was to condition people. It was a real live Milgram experiment, and we just went through it. In my view, none of it is legal under the Nuremberg Code of 1947, which almost all Western and all countries around the world adopted. Because the whole, we went through this before where we trusted a bunch of white lab coats to run the world. And it led to the Connie Buck decision in the U.S. Supreme Court, morally horrendous, one of the worst decisions ever that said forced sterilizations was okay. It was relied on a prior decision called Jacobson, which said forced vaccinations could, under certain circumstances, be okay. And then that ultimately led to Korematsu. I call it the trilogy of infamy, the Jacobson, the Buck, and the Korematsu decisions, where the government said we can do whatever we want to whomever we want, whenever we want, under some fee or pretext. We have since said those decisions were horrendous, particularly the latter two. So given that, in the Nuremberg Code of 1947, and those three decisions predated that, was supposed to stop all of that because it said no more experimentation on human beings, period, in the name of medicine or the name of science. States have no right to do so. And what states have to get is informed consent. And what that means is you have to be informed, and consent means it can't be mandatory. Our emergency use authorization statute under federal law incorporates the Nuremberg Code explicitly and expressly and says you cannot mandate this vaccine while it is simply an emergency use authorized vaccine. This was decided in the Doe v. Rumsfeld case when they tried to force it on a different experimental vaccine on soldiers back in 2001 and 2002. Then they were trying to do an anthrax experimental vaccine for people going into the Iraqi war theater. By the way, that backfired. Those who did take it, that's another story. There's a long history of this. Swine flu vaccine. People can still look it up. 60 Minutes, 1976. Last time we rushed a vaccine to deal with an epidemic, the vaccine became the epidemic. The vaccine became the real problem. And this is about people's right to choose. What I tell people is I'm not arguing for the vaccine or against the vaccine. I'm arguing for ordinary, everyday people's right to choose for themselves what is good for them. For parents to choose for their children, not schools, not governments, not politicians. For everybody to choose for themselves, because that's what the Nuremberg Code of 1947 was all about. It was never again. And in my view, in fact, federal courts have enforced the Nuremberg Code. I believe is part of the Constitution. The right to privacy includes the right to bodily integrity. How is it you could have a right to terminate a life in terms of abortion, but you don't have a right to determine whether the government sticks some experimental product in your body? Those two don't go together. If somebody believes in one, I don't see how they believe in the other. And so in my view, it's not constitutional. The Nuremberg Code is enforceable. The statute doesn't permit it. There's also issues with employers doing it under the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act. So there's issues with government requiring public disclosure of it under HIPAA. So I think there's a range of issues that legally are going to be litigated by me and Bobby Kennedy on these cases to the degree they actually start mandating it.
So once again, going back to my original question, why? I mean, do you know what I mean? But this is. Let me dumb it down to the rich dad level of comprehension. I think these guys were a bunch of nerds in school. Do you know what I mean? And they got no respect. And they thought the only way they could get respect is become this academic elite and look down their noses on people and all this. And it's, in my opinion, it's their dark side coming out. They don't like being nerds. They want to control it.